Welcome to PowerShell Bytes Episode 2, Discovering PowerShell Commandlets. If you're familiar with maybe command prompt, or maybe you have a background in Linux and you're used to using this shell, and you're just getting started with PowerShell, it's easy to be inclined to do a few different things. And one is to start and try to memorize the different PowerShell commandlets. And when you learn whatever command line interface that you know, that might be what you did to get started. If you're used to, say, command prompt, well, there's ipconfig, netuse, netview, and many other commands. If you're coming from a Linux background, there's ifconfig, grep, awk, and again, many other commands that you'll commonly use. And when you started learning, you probably committed those to memory pretty quickly so you could become a little bit more proficient. Now, if you needed to complete a task and you did not know the command, you might open up Google and start searching to try to find the right command to complete whatever task that you're trying to accomplish. Or maybe you open a pocket reference guide to look up a list of commands, to figure out what you need to use. Now, you can certainly do this in PowerShell, but it's really not the most effective use of your time, and you'll become a lot more productive if you use the built-in PowerShell discoverability features to find whatever command that you need to know without ever leaving PowerShell. And now, PowerShell is discoverable because of a few different things. One is the naming convention. It really starts there, and that is verb-noun. Now, all commandlets are named using this convention, and I'll be honest, it's a little weird when you first get started, but it starts to make sense once you start using it. Well, the verb is simply, an action followed by a dash, and the noun is whatever action you're applying it to. So for example, if I want to get a list of services, there's a command called get service. If I want to get process, or processes, there's a commandlet for that called get process. If I want to, let's say, restart this computer, there's a commandlet for that called restart computer. Probably starting to get the hang of this. If I want to restart a service, restart-service. Now, what if I want to shut down this computer? Shut down -computer. I'm going to go ahead and press tab for autocomplete, and if the commandlet existed on this system, it would autocomplete computer, but that commandlet doesn't exist. But if you start to notice there's a reuse of these verbs, and you probably start thinking, there's probably a list of verbs that you can use, and you would be right for thinking so. There's a commandlet I'll show you right now called getVerb, which shows you all the approved verbs for PowerShell. Now I'm going to scroll back up here, and if you look, there's a group here, common. These are the common verbs that you'll see over and over. For instance, get, you already saw. There's other common ones such as set and new and many more. Now if you go down to the life cycle, there is restart. You saw that. Start and stop. You'll notice there is no shutdown, but there's stop. So just by looking at that, I can probably guess there's probably a commandlet called stop-computer, and you would be right. There is, and that's how I would shut down the computer if I needed to, or another computer. Now, I want you to take notice here of the nouns. If you look at computer, service, process, these different ones, you'll notice that it's using the singular use of the noun and the full name. It's not get services, and it's not get some acronym or not some abbreviation such as SVC, which you might be familiar seeing in other command line interfaces, the commands out there. Now this is really important for what I'm about to show you next, and that's searching for commandlet by names. Now if I want to get all the services, for instance, all the commandlets for service that has the name service in it, I can do so using a couple different commandlets. One is get help. This will be using the help system to find commandlets that are installed on this system. Now if you'll notice, I put an asterisk before and after the name service. That is a wildcard in PowerShell, which stands for 0 or many characters. And by placing one before and after the word, this will pull up any PowerShell commandlets with the name service installed on my system. I'll go ahead and press return here, and it gives me a list. There's get service, which I typed earlier. There's also new service, which you haven't seen, but by the naming convention verb-noun, you probably have a good idea what that does. That probably creates a new service. And same thing with, well, start service. That starts a service. You'll notice that these commandlets are very, very readable because they're not abbreviated for the most part, and they make very readable name. They make a very readable name out of it. Get service. It makes sense for what that's going to do. Now, the other commandlet that I typically use more often for discovering commands is the commandlet called get command. I can use it in, well, the same way to discover commands, but it does so in a little bit different way. For one, you'll notice here's the function in commandlets, which is, well, PowerShell. And you'll also notice here as application. This is actually searching for native Windows applications on my system. And if you're a Windows administrator, these probably look pretty familiar. Services.msc you probably use frequently to check the status of a service, stop, restart it, and, well, many other tasks. Now, one other side note I want to point out is I actually pulled this out of the help documentation for get command, and that states get command gets its data directly from the command code, unlike get help, which gets its information from help topics. Now, essentially, I can use them to find pretty much the same information, but in the back end, it actually goes about it a little bit different. And I find that get command seems to be a little bit quicker in returning commands, especially if you have a broader result that returns a large set. Now, before I wrap up, there's one other command that I think is worth mentioning, and that is show command. And I'll be honest, I don't really ever use this command, but if you're just getting started with PowerShell, it's a great way to start discovering commands and kind of getting familiar with them. What this does is it opens up, you'll see a GUI here, and it has a list of, well, all the commandlets that are installed on my system. I can just start typing, for instance, service, and it filters the results. It's a quick, easy way to start exploring commandlets on your system. It also serves more purposes than that. I can click on here, and I can see all the parameters and parameter sets that can be used with this command. Now, I'm not getting into that in this episode, but it's worth noting. Now, that pretty much wraps it up. Hopefully you can see how you can use PowerShell's discoverability features to pretty much find any commandlet you need without ever leaving the shell. And you'll become much more productive in doing so than trying to constantly go online and look things up when, well, you can find it right within the shell. Now, if you stick with me in future episodes, I'm going to break down the PowerShell help system to pretty much show you how you can learn how to use any commandlet on your system right in PowerShell.